Coming up on Network Africa. 2 people die of the dreaded Ebola virus in Uganda as the disease spreads outside DR Congo. The United States join an international effort to press Sudan's military rulers and the opposition to it a deal on a transition. Plus, an Egyptian court sentences 32 defendants to life in prison for plotting to assassinate President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi 5 years ago. Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. Former President of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, and his Ghanaian counterpart, Mr. John Kufuor, have asked the African Union and the Economic Community of West African States to act on the political situation in the West African country of Republic of Benin. In a statement jointly signed by the former African leaders, both men declared that there is a need for the intervention in order to avoid an escalation of the festering political crisis. Part of the statement reads, in the follow-up to the parliamentary election that took place on April 28, 2019, which was considered to be exclusive for not accommodating the opposition parties in the electoral process, there is a general feeling of violation of the individual and collective liberties, which has invariably culminated in the restrictions currently imposed on former President Boni Yayi and some other opposition leaders, end of quote. Yayi, who served as president from 2006 to 2016, led an improvised demonstration on April 19 to call for a delay of the vote. 10 days later, at least 4 people died when security forces used live ammunition to disperse a protest near his house in the commercial capital. Since then, police have been deployed in the area, blocking him from leaving or receiving visitors. In Uganda, a second person has died of Ebola 2 days after the government confirmed its first case of the virus in Kasisi, a district bordering the Democratic Republic of Congo. Health officials confirmed that the 50-year-old grandmother of the child who tested positive on Tuesday died on Wednesday night at the isolation unit where she was being treated. She's expected to be buried today. 7 other suspected cases are also being monitored. Uganda has intensified its public campaigns about Ebola and has stepped up screening at all major border points.
2 people have died in neighboring Uganda in the first cases of Ebola reported in the country.
So the Ministry of Health would like to inform the public of the confirmation of Ebola virus disease in Kasese district, Uganda.
This confirms the spread of the outbreak beyond the borders of the Democratic Republic of Congo. There are at least 6 other suspected cases of the virus in Uganda. A 5-year-old Congolese boy and his grandmother, the 2 victims, raising serious concerns that the deadly virus could spread further and kill many more people. On the streets of Kampala, residents are worried.
As per now, me, I'm safe because I haven't seen any symptom of Ebola. But I think the government should also continue to sensitize people about the Ebola, since they have confirmed some 3 cases as per now. It means we are not safe.
I think it can be contained, but there must be cooperation from the people who have symptoms to identify themselves and then be confined. But you know, when people have the symptoms, they want to hide, and then they mix with the greater population, which now spreads the disease to wider areas. Yeah, so people should cooperate, but again, the government should also come out strongly and talk about it.
Uganda has suffered regular outbreaks of Ebola over the years. The country has been on high alert for a possible spread of the virus and has already vaccinated many frontline health workers. Its neighbor, the DRC, has recorded over 2,000 cases of the virus since this most recent epidemic began in August. This outbreak is the 2nd largest on record. The epidemic in West Africa in 2013 to 2016 infected 28,000 people and killed 11,300 people, mostly in Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone.
Meanwhile, Tanzania's health minister says Tanzanians should not worry about the spread of Ebola as the country is well prepared to combat the virus. Tanzania shares a long border with DR Congo, where an Ebola outbreak has killed nearly 1,400 people. On Tuesday, Tanzania, along with Kenya, launched a program to monitor people as they cross into the country. The health minister says the program will help the authorities quickly share information if Ebola is detected. To political matters now, the top U.S. diplomat for Africa, Tibor Nagy, has joined an international effort to press Sudan's military rulers and the opposition toward a deal on a transition to democracy 2 months after the overthrow of former President Omar al-Bashir. This comes as the military and opposition groups agree to resume talks on the formation of a transitional council that collapsed after the violent crackdown of a protest sit-in on June the 3rd. Yesterday, Mr. Nagy, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, met with the main opposition coalition and held talks with Sudan's acting Deputy Foreign Minister, Ilham Ibrahim. Before the meetings, the State Department said Mr. Nagy will urge the parties to work toward an environment conducive to the resumption of negotiations. The United States also named veteran diplomat Donald Booth as its envoy to Sudan. After the meeting, the main opposition coalition said that it would only participate in indirect talks and it would impose other conditions. A former Prime Minister of Algeria, Ahmed Yahya, has appeared in the country's Supreme Court as a series of investigations into high-level corruption continues. Mr. Yahya served under former President Abdulaziz Bouteflika, who was forced to resign in April after weeks of street protests. Corruption investigators have since been targeting senior officials and businessmen who were close to Mr. Bouteflika during his 20 years in power. The former Prime Minister is the latest figure to be investigated on corruption allegations since mass protests erupted more than 3 months ago, demanding the departure of the ruling class and the persecution of people they see as corrupt. Now, an Egyptian court has reportedly sentenced 32 defendants to life in prison for plotting to murder both President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and the former Saudi Crown Prince Nayef bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. The accused allegedly planned to carry out the attacks while Mr. Sisi was on a pilgrimage to Mecca 5 years ago. The group was also found guilty of killing 2 judges, 4 policemen, and a civilian. Let's get more on this story now from the VOA's Edward Yeranian, who joins us live from Cairo. Thanks for joining us on the program, Ed.
My pleasure, Tenny.
So what more can you tell us about the 32 people sentenced to death for plotting to kill President Sisi and the former Saudi Crown Prince 5 years ago?
Well, the military court which handed down these sentences very rarely gives out specific information. It functions under a separate system than the civilian courts. And what we do know is that at least half of the people who were sentenced in absentia, which means they are not being detained at the moment, and that the Egyptian judicial system will have to give them another trial, or the military system will have to give them another trial when they are finally apprehended, if they're finally apprehended. Also, what we know is that this case on the president's life took place a number of years ago, so this has been in the system for quite a while. And why did they hand the sentences down now? It's not really clear. Perhaps they want to be firm with terrorism at a time when there were several attacks in the Sinai that got a lot of publicity.
It is interesting that the decision is coming now, but we understand that the court also sentenced 264 other defendants to 3 to 15 years in prison, all on terror charges, including militant attacks. How are Egyptians reacting to this? Are they satisfied with the government's efforts to curb terrorism in the country?
Well, Tenny, I think public opinion is probably divided along the lines of those who support the government and those who do not. My experience is that those who support the government think it's doing a good job in the battle against terrorism, and those who don't support the government would criticize it for anything, right or wrong. So it's difficult to say really. Although there was a bit of a spike of public discontent after the recent attack on the Sinai about a week ago. So that always does put pressure on the government to react or to show that it's reacting.
Yeah, Ed, just before I let you go, can those convicted appeal the sentences?
Well, normally in a regular court, we have 3 tries. That say there are 3 separate appeals, and on the 3rd decision, that's the final decision. In a military court, it's less clear, although the military has the right pretty much to do what it likes, could undoubtedly resentence or hold a new trial if it wanted to.
All right, then, VOA's Edward Yeroni, and it's always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for joining us on Network Africa. Moving on to other stories, Mali's Council of Ministers has fired the governor of its central Mopti region after gunmen killed dozens of people in the latest spate of ethnic killings there. Attackers believed to belong to the Fulani ethnic group raided a rival ethnic Dogon village in Bankas on Sunday and Monday, killing at least 35 people. The government has also declared 3 days of national mourning over the tragic incident. In March, President Boubacar Keïta dismissed 2 top army officials, and his prime minister and entire government resigned after an attack killed more than 150 Fulani villagers in Mali's worst act of violence in years. Meanwhile, the United Nations Special Representative for Mali, Mohamed An-Nadif, has condemned the hellish, vicious cycle of violence in Mali, saying this must be stopped before people begin to take justice in their own hands. His remarks to the UN Security Council came just days after attackers raided the rival Dogon village of Sobanda in Mali's central Mopti region, torching homes and shooting people. Malians have grown increasingly frustrated over the failure of the government of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta to protect them from both jihadist onslaughts and ethnic reprisals. Mali, a former French colony, has been in turmoil since Tuareg rebels and loosely allied Islamists took over its north in 2012. Now, 2 Canadian women have been rescued after they were kidnapped last week by gunmen in Ghana's second city, Kumasi. The 2 students, aged 19 and 20, were working as volunteers for a charity when they were taken. Kidnapping in Ghana, regarded as one of West Africa's most stable states, are extremely rare. However, there have been several recently, usually involving ransom demands. Ghana's information minister said in a statement that security forces carried out an operation in the early hours of Wednesday to rescue the women. This comes as Ghana's president, Nana Akufo-Addo, has vowed to take tough action to end the spate of kidnappings in the country.
Holding the women, the holding place of the victims was subsequently surrounded just before 5 a.m. this morning, and by 5:15 a.m., the joint team had breached the premises with the hope of rescuing the women. Gunshots were fired from within the premises, but the brief we have is that it took about 25 minutes to complete this operation. At the end of the operation, the 2 Nigerians who were holding the women had been subdued, and a 3rd Nigerian, believed to be the leader of the gang, was arrested later at a separate location. 5 Ghanaians and 3 Nigerians are in custody for this incident. One of the suspects is reported to have sustained minor injuries. Other investigations and possible arrests are still ongoing. The victims have been flown to Accra, are currently in Accra. They have been in contact with the Canadian authorities and are undergoing the necessary evaluations following a traumatic incident like this. Preliminary indications that we have is that they are fine. National investigations and special weapons and tactics.
Still to come on the program. The world marks International Albinism Awareness Day with the theme Still Standing Strong. Please stay with us.